The final hours of Liddell Lee. Was he wrongfully put to death? Dear friends, we step into one of the most haunting cases in America's death row history. A case that still asks the same chilling question. Did Arkansas execute an innocent man? In 1993, a young woman named Deborah Reese was brutally attacked in her own home. Within hours, police arrested a man named Ledell Lee. He insisted he was innocent. For more than 2 decades, through trial after trial, appeal after appeal, he never changed his story. And on April 20th, 2017, Arkansas ended his life with a lethal injection. His last meal? Holy Communion. His last words? None. He died in silence. But years later, DNA tests revealed something Arkansas never expected. The evidence didn't point to Lee. It pointed to someone else. Stay with me until the end, because this case will shake your faith in justice. And don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful prison documentaries. Dear friends, it was February 9th, 1993, in Jacksonville, Arkansas. 26-year-old Deborah Reese, a young mother and newlywed, had stayed home from work. Her husband had left earlier that morning, expecting her to run errands and wait for his return. But when a neighbor noticed her front door cracked open later that day, a horrifying scene was uncovered. Deborah lay inside her bedroom, bludgeoned to death. The brutality shocked the community. Over 30 blows from a wooden club, a tool belonging to her husband. The attack was frenzied, personal, and savage. Police acted fast, too fast. Within just 2 hours, they had their suspect, 27-year-old Liddell Lee, a black man who lived nearby. Witnesses claimed they saw a man who looked like him wandering the neighborhood that morning, knocking on doors. But their accounts were vague and inconsistent. One had been drinking. Another admitted uncertainty. Still, Lee was arrested before the day ended. When investigators tested Lee's shoes, they found no blood. His fingerprints didn't match those at the scene. His hair samples were microscopically similar to hairs found near Deborah, but back then, hair comparison wasn't science. It was guesswork. Today, experts call it junk science. But this didn't matter. The case was already set in motion. A poor black man accused of killing a white woman in her own home. It was enough to spark fear, outrage, and a demand for quick justice. From the moment his name hit the headlines, Lee was branded a monster. His face filled newspapers. His story filled living rooms. There was no video, no DNA, no eyewitness placing him inside the house, yet the narrative was written. Lee's trial quickly became a nightmare of corruption and incompetence. His attorney, known to struggle with alcohol, was intoxicated in court. At times, he slurred his words, failed to object to damaging testimony, and never requested DNA testing on critical evidence like the murder weapon or the bloodied shirt found near the scene. Even worse, the judge overseeing the case was secretly having an affair with the prosecutor. The man supposed to ensure fairness was intimately involved with the person trying to secure a conviction. That fact wouldn't come out until years later. By then, it was far too late. During the first trial, the jury deadlocked. But in the retrial, prosecutors came harder. They introduced Lee's past 2 assaults on women in unrelated cases. This painted him as a predator, someone capable of anything. The jury deliberated just 2 hours before finding him guilty of capital murder. The sentence: death. To many, Lee was already guilty long before his trial. In 1990, a 17-year-old girl said he attacked her, leaving her unconscious in a ditch. DNA evidence in that case tied him to the assault. In 1991, another woman testified that Lee strangled her behind a school building. He was convicted and sentenced to life plus 150 years. He was also tried, though never convicted, in the 1989 killing of Christine Lewis. That trial ended in a mistrial after juror misconduct, and prosecutors never pursued it again. These crimes stained his record. They made him look like a man capable of horrific violence. And while those cases had nothing to do with Deborah Reese's death, they became the silent anchor, pulling him deeper toward death row. By 2017, Lee had been on death row for over 20 years. His appeals focused on one simple request: let the DNA speak. His lawyers begged the state to test the wooden club, the victim's clothes, and the bloodied shirt. Science could finally give an answer. But Arkansas said no. Why? Because the state was running out of its lethal injection drug, midazolam. If it expired, executions would stall for years. To avoid that, officials scheduled 8 executions in 11 days, an unprecedented rush. Lee was at the front of the line. His last appeals were denied, not because the evidence wasn't important, but because the clock had run out. Justice was not blind, it was impatient. On April 20th, 2017, Liddell Lee was led into the execution chamber at the Cummins unit. He refused a special last meal, instead choosing only communion. As witnesses filed in, Lee declined to make a final statement. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just lay still as the first drug entered his veins. By 11:56 in the evening, he was pronounced dead. Arkansas had carried out its first execution in more than a decade. Some called it closure. Others called it injustice. But the truth hadn't spoken yet. 4 years later, in 2021, the truth emerged. After relentless pressure from Lee's family, the Innocence Project, and the ACLU, a court finally allowed DNA testing on evidence from the crime scene. The results were staggering. The murder weapon, the wooden club, contained DNA from an unknown man, not Lee. The bloody shirt found near the scene? Same unknown man. The fingerprints at the crime scene? They didn't match Lee either. Forensic hair analysis, once used to suggest his guilt, was now deemed unreliable. In the end, not a single piece of physical evidence tied Liddell Lee to Deborah Reese's murder, and yet he was executed anyway. Lee wasn't an innocent man in the broad sense. He had committed terrible crimes, ones he paid for with prison sentences. But the crime that cost him his life, the killing of Deborah Reese, remains unproven. No blood, no fingerprints, no DNA, just a rushed investigation, a drunk lawyer, a conflicted judge, and a community desperate for someone to blame. That was enough to kill him. So the haunting question remains: was Liddell Lee executed for what he did, or for who he was? A poor black man with a violent past, accused of killing a white woman in a small Arkansas town. This case forces us to confront a grim truth. The justice system is not infallible. It makes mistakes. And when it comes to executions, mistakes are permanent. Liddell Lee went to his death in silence, but years later, science spoke for him. And now, his silence has become a warning. Justice is meant to be blind, but in the case of Liddell Lee, it seemed impatient and perhaps willfully deaf to the truth. Arkansas strapped him to a gurney and ended his life not because DNA proved his guilt, but because time was running out on a drug supply. 4 years later, science whispered what the courts refused to hear. The evidence didn't point to him. It pointed to someone else. Dear friends, the story of Liddell Lee is more than a tragedy. It is a warning. If the system can take the life of one man without certainty, how many more names wait in silence? Deborah Reese still deserves justice. Her family deserves the truth. But instead, both were robbed by a system that chose speed over proof. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel. Together, let's keep questioning, keep remembering, and never let silence bury the truth.